Hey everyone, Priory here and welcome to my channel. If you somehow stumbled upon this video and you don't want to be spoiled for Priory of the Orange Tree, then pause this video now and look into the description because I will be linking my spoiler-free review for the Priory of the Orange Tree down below. But so this is not a spoiler-free review. I will be going into some of the more spoiler-filled revelations about this book. So I hope I've now given enough time for people to get out of here. So Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon is an epic standalone fantasy including dragons. Now I want to be discussing certain elements about the story. I want to be discussing the world building, the characters, character development, and whatever else comes up throughout my discussion of this. So first of all, the world building. The world building is, according to me, like the strength of this book, you know. If you're somebody who really loves world building in a fantasy novel, then this one is definitely up your alley. I really enjoyed being introduced to the very different cultures and mainly seeing how this one big event in the history of this world has resulted in very different standpoints from these different cultures, has had very different cultural opinions. So the event that I'm of course talking about is the first defeat of the Nameless One. So the Nameless One is like a giant evil dragon that was destroyed 1,000 years ago, and so according to the way that people in the East see it, for example, it's more like the dragons who are responsible for the defeat of the Nameless One. It was the dragons who have sacrificed a lot during what they call the Great Sorrow, and so the dragons as a result have become like the entity that they worship, and they have become their gods, versus on the west of this world it's more like they have this legacy of the damsel and the gallant knights, and where for the people who support virtuedom it is the knight who was the one who destroyed the dragon. For people from, for example, the Priory of the Orange Tree, it was actually the damsel who did so, and this has impacted their worldviews. You know, especially I think the role of females as well. You know, in virtuedom we might be following a queendom. However, the queen's reign is very much still dependent on the idea of the queen producing an heir, because as long as there is an heir from the original line of the damsel, then the Nameless One will not reappear. So basically what seems to be the most important thing for this queen to do is to produce a female heir. On the other hand, we have the Priory of the Orange Tree, which is very much a female warrior society in which the females are raised to protect the world against the return from the Nameless One, to slay dragons and protect other realms. So it's interesting to see how a different take on these different stories has led to very different cultures. You have the more, what we would then see like as an oriental culture in which dragons are worshipped. Then you have the male-centric universe of the Innish kingdom, and then you have the more female-centered idea about the Priory. And so throughout the book we are introduced to different elements of how, sorry, I just left my cat by accident. So throughout the book we are given glimpses into the original story. We're being shown that it was indeed like the damsel who destroyed the Nameless One, and that it was actually, the knight was actually unhappy with the situation, and so he basically created a sort of cult around himself, which is then became virtuedom, or the religion of the West. And later on we find actually even more about it when we find out that the damsel was actually not the originator of the line of female queens, but that it was actually the mother of the knight who pretended to be the damsel. So I mean, it was a very interesting plot and history for me. I did feel like I would have liked to have gotten something else about the history of these two different places. It was very much focused around this one particular event, especially, I mean, this is understandable because the Nameless One is about to return. However, it also made me feel like that was like the one thing that had happened in the history of this world, and that there was not enough historical depth to it. That there was not enough historical depth to this book. Of course, that all depends on whether you would have wanted to be a series or whether you prefer it to have stayed a standalone. In a standalone, there's no room for this, and so I definitely understand this choice and respect the choice as well. What I very much also liked was the fact that when the cultures come in contact with each other here, it's not necessarily that there's always huge respect between the cultures, but when their views are being challenged, they do start to doubt their views on the world, start to see that it's possible that their view on the world is not the correct view on the world. It's not what actually happens. So whereas at the very beginning of the book or something, I feel like most people who hear about or are talking about people from another culture are very much saying like, yeah, but these people are this or that, they're barbaric because they believe in dragons as being like supreme beings, or yeah, they're just bastards because they have totally ruined our origin story of the damsel. I feel like throughout the book this changes. They become more aware of the other side of this story, of other perspectives on the story, and also become to realize that none of these stories might actually be the correct story, and start to embrace the fact that maybe they have to change the way that they have seen the world so far. So in that sense, I thought it was a very powerful portrayal of meetings between cultures. You know, it wasn't just about broadening your expanse, it was also about broadening your expanse and then looking inward and seeing in which way your world might expand. So I find that to be very interesting. Now, what I felt about the world building that wasn't, that I didn't find to be particularly nice is, but what I found about the world building to be less pleasing for me was a little bit of a lack where it concerned the dragons. So the fact that there were going to be dragons in this book was very much an appeal for me and for a whole lot of readers as well, I feel. And there were definitely dragons in there, and they definitely got to play a prominent part. However, I still feel like they weren't very well fleshed out. I feel like they were just like this distant beings that were brought up and used throughout the story, but we didn't really get a sense for them at all. And so that's definitely not necessarily something concerning like the time you've been introduced to this character, because for example in Game of Thrones we're like 2 chapters into the book when Bran falls down and is crippled, and I really felt that, you know, I really liked the character of Bran and I was really like, what? Not this guy? Pick anybody else, but not Bran. So I feel like I never had this sort of feeling with any of these characters, you know. When Tane suddenly was like exiled to Feather Islands, I thought like, yeah, that sucks, but I didn't feel like, what? No, not Tane. Tane needs to be like the awesome dragon rider or whatever. I didn't really get emotionally invested with any of these characters, which is a crying shame. And I fear that that will probably have to do with the writing, because I don't really see with what else it has to do. Character development, I would also say, isn't necessarily big in there, you know. You have certain storylines that go through development. You have Nicholas Roos, who is basically going through development. However, that development is also like super rushed, you know. Well, he's constantly trying to get back to West, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to get back there to make it up to his granddaughter. And every single action in the book, up until one of his final actions, he's been taking selfishly, trying to get back there. And then suddenly we are introduced in his point of view to the idea that well, he could get back there if he kills this one pivotal character, but then he suddenly from one second to the other decides not to, and we're not introduced to that line of thinking, you know. We're not shown how he changes his mind, even though it's in his point of view. So that also to me felt like a little bit of a shortcoming. And furthermore, I think like most of the characters don't necessarily go through a super big development. I think Sabran undergoes some development, as in she is tested a lot by Eid. Eid doesn't just accept whatever Sabran wants, and so she learns to like see different sides to her story more, and she's definitely challenged in her worldviews and in her views about herself, so she's kind of forced to change. But for Eid, for example, the big change there is that she learns to accept the culture of virtuedom in which she ends up in, and she doesn't just consider it to be like these are the guys who are ruining our story or our version of things. But to me at least, it didn't seem like there was a huge amount of character development, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. You can have good fantasy without it, but so in case you're very much somebody who wants your characters to learn a lot, to go through an emotional change, I don't necessarily think you will be very rewarded by this book. I've so far seems to be only going into the negative. It's just because the character part is basically a little bit on the negative side for me, but I did still feel like there was a ton of good in this book, you know. I really liked so the world building, as I said in the beginning. I thought it was a very rich world, a very well elaborated world, a well balanced world. We're not just following the West, even though I still do feel like the West is predominantly our main character in this book, but we are also including all other societies in this world, and I thought it did a wonderful job at like portraying these societies and giving them voices. Now, I did also definitely love a lot of the female characters for being strong female characters with power that's not necessarily stemming from the physical power. You know, you have these physically strong characters like Eid, like Tane. However, they are also not just strong physically. You know, Tane has a will of her own. She's willing to do whatever it takes to get her goal, which I'm not saying is the ideal that we must strive for or anything like that, but she's strong at least in that way, you know. It's a strength that's often not given to females in books, but she's definitely one that takes that power. And then Sabran, for example, is also a character who is not physically strong on that side. You know, she's a queen, she's protected, she doesn't need to be physically strong, but she does command an audience, she does know how to use words as power sources, and she does not allow others to just step over her. You know, there are people trying to take control, trying to keep her in line, and she will not necessarily follow in that follow along in that path. And then you have, for example, Eid, who is a strong female warrior. However, she's also strong in the sense that she makes decisions that break with the tradition she has had so far. She makes decisions that break with the Priory, the sisterhood that she's felt her entire life, all for love, for her love. And even though she does all of this, at the end of the book she decides that it is more important for her to return to the Priory and to put her stamp on its history than to stay with Sabran and have their romantic life the way that they would want it. And there are multiple cases like this. There's also Margaret, who at the end of the book is like, knows that everybody wants her and her brother to be reunited, but she wants to be able to contribute. So when they're asking for people who can help in the big battle in Cascaro, to help heal people who get wounded there, she answers the call because she knows that she's gonna be way more useful over there than she will be on the Abyss. So I definitely liked the many manifestations of strong female characters, and especially the manifestations of strong sisterly bonds, friendly bonds. You know, these aren't backstabbing females put together in the same circumstances. They support each other, they protect each other. There are definitely also other examples in this book, but they should also be there. There's always a balance to be made. In terms of overall plots, I like the whole idea with like the slowly unraveling the original story of what happened 1,000 years ago, slowly unraveling that we are actually going to relive this entire same battle, but between different ancestors from the original players and some of the original players themselves. I felt that there was a problem with the pacing towards the final war, and a lot of people have said this, so the final war is like super short in comparison to the rest of the novel, and I definitely felt like there was a huge pacing problem because of this, because after the final war is over we still have like 30 or 40 pages of like rounding off of the story, which to me felt super slow. I really couldn't be bothered to continue anymore almost at that point, because I didn't really care what happened to the characters afterwards, it seems. So this is once again saying that the characters, like, I didn't necessarily feel for them too much, you know. I liked them, but that is all about everything. So I think that the pacing there was a problem with that, and so I ended up giving this book a 4-star rating. That is mainly due to well, I really enjoyed it, even though I've been mostly explaining why the faults I saw in this book, but I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the world, I really enjoyed strong female powers, strong female characters, and female sisterhood and things like that. I really enjoyed the mythologies of this world, the seeing of a new manifestation of some of these mythological characters, and all of these are really what made me really enjoy the book. What made me say that it's not a 5-star read is the lack of emotional involvement with the characters, and the pacing problems and structure problems I had throughout more of the second part of the book. So I think if you would have asked me how my star rating at like the midway point to 60% point of this book, it could have maybe even been 5-star rating. But then it really started for me that, I mean, I also took a break in there for a little bit, in which, but it just felt like the structure was wrong, the pacing was wrong, and that ultimately is the reason why I cannot give it a 5-star rating. Though I really did enjoy it, and I also don't feel like it deserves like a 3-star rating. It definitely deserves its 4-star rating. So please comment down below if you have read this book and have more opinions to share about it. I'm sure that if you want to comment on a certain theme or motive in the story, that I can also come back to you guys about that then. I've basically just been saying whatever came to mind at this point, and I hope it's come across semi-structurally. But yeah, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more of my content, please subscribe and like this video if you liked it. So see you guys next time. Bye.